Thank you. Hey guys, so welcome everyone. Hope you still have some energy. I'm Rachel and I'm currently a lead service designer at Pearson.
And I'm Giles Colborne and I'm founder and CEO of CX Partners.
So today we would like to talk about how our mentorship journey supported me to evolve as a leader. And before I begin, I'm curious, just a quick hands, how many of you identify yourself as a leader right now? Great. And how many of you identify yourself as an aspiring leader? Cool.
Okay. Well, so if you're a leader or an aspiring leader, I hope that what we've got to say will help you to kind of place your role in context of the people around you and to think about the journey that they're on and the journey that you're on.
Mm-hmm. So our mentorship journey actually started over 3.5 years ago. And I first met Giles at a UX conference known as MEX. We were actually both speakers, had our own talks. But I remember talking to him and swapping stories about culture, travel, and so forth. And I had the travel bug at the time while I was coming back to living in UK, so I really admired him, like going around all around the world doing speaking and kind of wishing that I could do the same one day.
And yeah, I was talking about the role of culture in managing and designing organisations. And Rachel's talk was a case study of some of the work that she'd been doing in Asia. And it really made a strong impression on me because it was really insightful and creative. And what she was doing was answering the questions that needed to be answered, not the questions that she was asked. So already she was really, stepping out in front and doing the things that a leader needs to do. And it was one of the talks that made an absolutely strong impression on me at the time.
And for me, I couldn't really stay for the conference for long, but I managed to hear Giles talk. And he left me feeling really intrigued and curious because it was the first time I heard about organisational design. And after about 6 to 12 months later, I felt like I wanted to reach out to Giles to ask whether he, on the off chance, would like to be interested in mentoring me. And this was because it was someone that I felt like I could comfortably talk to about my professional growth. However, I did hesitate because, first of all, Giles is a CEO of a company. He probably has a family, he travels a lot. How would he have time for me? But I thought I'll make the leap and see what happens. And I messaged him to say that I'm really interested to learn from him about leadership, about strategy, and organisational design.
So, of course, I remembered Rachel, and I said, yes, let's meet up. Normally, mentoring means helping somebody with a specific problem they have right now. A lot of mentoring relationships never really get beyond what the first problem, and you fix that problem, and then somebody moves on, and they're done, and that's okay. Occasionally, it turns into a longer journey, and that's what's happened to us. I've asked myself, well, why was this different from so many of the others? And I think something important there was just that we'd had a chance to kind of see each other's work and understand where each other was coming from before we then began that journey. So we kind of knew a little bit about what to expect. And when we sat down face to face to talk through what that relationship was going to be like, there was a little bit of something to draw on. And we didn't really formally draw up a contract with each other. But when we think back to that conversation, we did agree in principle a lot of the things that turned into the relationship. So we understood something about why we were doing it. We understood something about the kind of the cadence of those questions, how long we might expect between those conversations. And I think if I were going to do it again, there's maybe one thing that I would change, and that is that I would write those things down. When we began, we thought, okay, actually we would like to find somebody outside of this to kind of own this mentoring relationship and oversee this mentoring relationship, and that's one of the things that UXPA does. And I think it's useful to have those things written down, and it's useful to have somebody outside of that relationship just as a place where mentor and mentee can go to, because you don't need it until you need it. And then you need to be able to say, well, what did we agree? You need to be able to say, well, who mediates here if things aren't going well? For us, I think we knew what we were getting into, we talked it through, and we're really comfortable with it. We were lucky that way.
So that's how our mentorship journey began. And over the years, there were 3 key moments that I found really significant in evolving as a leader. And this includes leading the self, leading others, and leading life. At the time, I actually wasn't aware that was in this journey, but it also uncovered many misconceptions about what leadership really means. So the first conversation I had with Giles was about how I can make more impact with my work. And one possibility was to do more public speaking, so I can share my insights and experience as a way to give back to the UX community. And one day, an ex-colleague kind of shared a possibility of going, well, why don't you speak at the UX conference in Amsterdam? And it sounded really attractive. But when I browsed on the website and everything, saw the lineup of speakers of how many years that they have as design leaders, it really put a lot of doubt. And I started to question, well, am I qualified to apply? How can I talk about strategy when there's so many other great bunch of design leaders out there? What do I know? And it all came to feeling that I wasn't really good enough to be on stage, and I didn't really want to disappoint or look pathetic in front of hundreds of people. So I kind of hesitated and wanted to shy away at this opportunity, but I thought this was the time to pick Giles' brain.
And I was very lucky. I'd already seen Rachel speak, and I'd already made the transition that she was talking about, from speaking at smaller meetups to speaking in front of hundreds of people at larger conferences. And I'd actually spoken at that conference that she'd spoken about. So I was very fortunate, as a mentor, I'd been on that journey, and I knew the specifics, I knew the facts that she would encounter along the way. And it was really easy for me to say, yeah, duh, you've totally got this. You'll be awesome. You will be one of the best things there. And it was very straightforward for me to say, okay, that's that.
So for him, he might think it's very straightforward. But for me, it took a lot of courage, but I did apply. Surprisingly, I made it to the shortlist, and I made it through. I was super excited until it dawned on me that I actually have to prepare and do the work for this talk. So I had a follow-up call with Giles to provide me with some great examples of, well, how can we structure this talk? What is the real story that you want to tell to the audience?
And I think, again, I was fortunate. Oh, we're going back, are we? I was fortunate that I've been involved not just in this conference, but in running other conferences. I've been involved in looking through speaker submissions and understanding what made a good speaker submission, what made a bad one, and thinking in my own work about, well, how do I structure a story? How do I tell a story? So for me, the role of mentor here was partly the moral support, saying, I know you can do this, and partly just saying, okay, here's what this looks like on the other side. Here's what this is going to look like to the conference organizers. Here's how you need to talk in order to get your talk accepted, in order to prepare for the day.
And you might be wondering, well, how did the conference go? Well, from my perspective, straight after talking on stage, I felt like I did really bad, and I couldn't wait to get off the stage. I felt a bit ashamed that the composition didn't flow as much as I would like to. I couldn't answer the questions and stuff. However, many speakers and attendees afterwards came looking for me just to tell me they really found the talk really insightful and really enjoyable. So I guess my lesson there, my valuable lesson, is that sometimes our self-doubt and judgment gets away and distorts the actual truth as well. I'm lucky that I rely on others, like Giles, to kind of really reassure that, hey, I am good enough. But actually, it's kind of better to start believing in that for yourself and finding that inner mentor voice to say, yes, you can, you are good enough, you can do it. And that's with practice. So my second key moment was about transitioning to influence stakeholders, to get their buy-in with our design process and to really show the value that we add for the work that we do. So since the UX Strat, I've built the confidence and say that, yes, I apply strategic thinking in the work that we do. We were able to, kind of build trust with stakeholders, push the boundaries of kind of innovation and stuff, because at the time, the Chinese market really demanded this. And it was great for us. It was like the dream project, and we seemed like we were on a high. But then there was an announcement that Pearson had decided to sell Wall Street English, which was the client that we were working on. So our kind of dream project just kind of ended at the same time. And then me and my colleague got reassigned to a new area of the business, assessment. So it was something really new. Didn't realize that they have no understanding of UX or service design at all. And we got given briefs to try and design I think a PDF of a score report. And we were like, really? It was a really shock for us. So we were moving from something that was very user-centered, very lean, very kind of agile way of working, very collaborative, to then something that was decision by committee, very developer-centric, very waterfall. And as most of you can imagine, you probably feel demotivated, well, I certainly did. It felt like a really slow burner to try and shift the stakeholders' mindset. Other times, I felt really overwhelmed and burnt out that I was the only one who really cared about the problem, and I was trying to solve and fix everything. So it was kind of like a tug of war between myself and the stakeholders. I had questions like, how can they not care about the fact that you think about design at a cosmetic level? How can they think that a 5-year-old interacting on an iPad is not different, like any different to like the teenagers? There's a huge gap there. And then how can they kind of think that actually shipping to a US product market is exactly the same as shipping elsewhere to somewhere like Asia? They have different needs. So we found out, for example, this terrible admin system that I tried to do 2 hours of training on it to understand how to use it. They don't even have an admin role in Asia. So we're even, teachers are actually doing this. So all of these frustrations kind of made me as an indicator to seek external opportunities. But before taking that kind of leap, I wanted to kind of brainstorm with Giles and get his thoughts on it.
So this is a different type of problem, and what Rachel was talking about was so many factors, things that were going on inside her organisation, and there was an awful lot to kind of unpick there. I'm ready to leave. I'm ready to go and do something different. I'm frustrated. I've been let down. I've been moved. My expectations have changed. I don't know how to deal with these people, and there's a big mess of stuff there. And I think as a mentor, the first type of problem that we spoke about, the how do you do this, here's how you do it, it's kind of a bit easy. But here was something where, I really didn't know what the landscape was. And this is where I think mentoring starts to get interesting. And I've got a framework that I use to just help to kind of pick my way through that. Because as a mentor, you're not there, you're not on the ground, you're not solving this problem. What you're really doing is helping somebody else to find their own solutions. And so this framework, which actually comes from a book called The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay, we've got a reading list for you at the end if you like frameworks, is a way for a coach of just picking through what needs to be done. And if you're a user researcher, if you're a UXer, you'll go, wait a minute, this is just asking a lot of questions. That's the whole point. You're not there to find the answer. You're there to help the mentee to find their own answers. So you begin just by trying to pick out what's on people's minds. And often it's a lot of stuff. Often it's well, this is a confusing, weird place that I'm in. I don't know what to do. There's an emotional reaction here. There are facts which haven't really been pieced together, which don't quite make sense. And so you're asking that question and you're looking to just gather information. And then you summarize it back, because that summarizing back helps, first of all, you to know that you've understood, and also helps the mentee to start to make sense. You ask, well, what else? You go a bit deeper. And this is the point when something shifts very often. So I think with Rachel, when we began the conversation, it was, I'm ready to leave. I need to move on. I need to know where to go next. And then what else here was really, how do I make these people understand? How do I teach people who don't understand the value of this and can't even see it? And how do I get through to them? And that turned out to be the real problem that was worth solving. So that third question, what's the real challenge for you here, is where the mentee starts to identify what needs to happen. It could have been, the real challenge for me here is I want to find a work environment that's like this. It could have been, I need to get away. But actually for Rachel, it wasn't that. It was about, I don't want to give up yet. I want to make this work. That fourth question then, what do you want, starts to help you paint a picture of the future, starts to help you to paint a picture of where you want to go with it. And then how can I help? That's the point at which you actually have permission to give some thoughts and advice. So you're spending most of the conversation just listening. You're spending most of the conversation helping the other person to sort out what it is that they need. And that's the really critical thing. How I can help often turns into something super simple. And for me and Rachel at this point, it was about saying, well, wait a minute, you almost need to do your own user research on these people who don't get it. What is it that they need? And how does that relate to the design skills that you're bringing to bear? And helping to make that connection. And that was something that really resonated. Something that was based on Rachel's experience, something that was a way of finding her way to the solution. Again, not me saying, okay, I think you should do this. Previously, we heard about about not saying yes to everything. And that's the next part. Once we'd identified, okay, this is the thing to do, you then have that strategic question. If you say yes to this, what are you going to say no to? What's interesting is sometimes you don't want to say no to the other stuff and you realize that you need to say no to this. Sometimes you realize that this question is not as important as perhaps you think it is because the other stuff is more important. That's useful. But how do I say no is often, you need the context of, well, what am I taking on, what am I losing here? And then finally, of course, reflection time. We also heard about that before. So just at the end of the conversation, what do we think we learned here? And that structured approach helps you to not wade in and offer solutions, but to listen and help the other person find their own way to what matters to them and what's right for them, what comes from their experience. And I think those things are really important.
So I think Giles' questions led me to really discover the valuable lesson of really respecting others for who they are and really have empathy like what we do with users, but actually with stakeholders. So the first insight I had was actually, well, let's try to understand it from the stakeholder perspective. What are their needs? What assumptions am I making about them? How can I actually help them? And in hindsight, if they are starting, if you look at the UX maturity model, they are starting from the bottom. So how do they know what they don't know? They're not aware of it themselves, and it's not their fault. So I think with this attitude, that kind of struggle started to melt away. And what happened was I started to reframe the challenge that I had into an opportunity. So it's almost like, well, how can I humanize products and services within assessment? No one seems to be doing that right now, so actually isn't that a great opportunity to make it much more user-friendly, make it credible, make it accessible, and so forth? And then the second insight was to really focus on where I can add value. So it's setting those boundaries as well, of saying, like, actually, this is where I can make most value, these are my strengths, this is what I can do great in, and actually that other part, maybe it's not worth the fight, you can let it go. It's not going to make that much impact anyway. And that's been really helpful. So some of the small things, as well as the big things too. For example, I noticed that my stakeholders aren't very good at visualizing the problem. That's something that I can do. Another one to think about is like, well, they're not very good at thinking about the bigger picture. Well, that's something that I can again use to my strengths. And fast forward to where we are now, we, as an experienced team, were kind of recognized at a board level as a centre of excellence. And officially, even though I've been doing service design undercover, we've been actually setting up our own service design practice.
So that was Rachel's solution, and that emerged through a conversation, and actually it emerged through mostly listening. And it could have been completely different. It could have been that the problem, as I say, was the thing that was initially presented. How do I find a different place that's right for me? I think what's really satisfying about that type of conversation is you're not going in there and working by proxy. You're helping somebody else to grow and to be themselves. And I think one of the things that was important there as a lesson for us was, leadership is not about a title. Leadership is not about being put in a position of authority. Fact is, I run my own business, and I know that actually if you're always pulling on the do this because I say, do this because I'm the person in charge, then you pretty quickly lose up the reservoirs of goodwill. You need to find ways in which people are willing to be led. People can lead themselves, and people will go along with you. You need, so even if you're in that position of ultimate authority, you can't lead in that way. And that means, of course, that if you're not in that position at the apex of the pyramid, you still have leverage. All of those tools are still available to you. And it turns out leadership isn't about your job title. It isn't about your authority. It's about your willingness to step into the middle, to identify what needs to be done, and to say, I think we should go here.
So the final moment I would like to talk about is a personal one, but I hope it resonates with you too. Have any of you felt pressured, especially in my 30s, to answer big life questions? Like, where is the place where you're going to call home? What does marriage mean to you? Do you want kids? What is life really about? And it's not even a singular decision to be made. It's a joint one when you're in a relationship. So this pressure, along with social norms, cultural sort of expectations and stuff.
Oh, sorry.
It could be really overwhelming. And I felt like I was running behind, trying to figure it all out in my 30s and stuff. I had really restless nights, and it was just kind of really difficult. The more I looked at research or stuff, or tried to look for inspiration, trying to be open to say, well, what if I want to be a mother one day? What does the working model look like? What are the alternatives? And it was the kind of brutal fact to say that there's a lot of limitations within our existing systems to kind of make things work differently if we wanted to do it differently. And I'm one of those people that likes to do things unconventionally, so that, for me, was a big pain point. And I ended up having to reach out to Giles to see if it can shift my perspectives.
This was really personal stuff. This was about who Rachel was and who she was being expected to be by other people. And that was something that really struck me. I think when we had this conversation, this really hurt in a way that the other things were scary or frustrating. But this was about, I'm wrong, I'm the wrong person in the wrong place. And that's a terrible way to feel. So it's a really personal moment for Rachel. And I think as a mentor, you're hearing that, it's really privileged, and you really have to respect that and be able to listen to that and also share those moments when you felt that way too. We all feel that way at times. We all feel like we're being pressured into being something other than what we are, pushed into a hole that's the wrong size, the wrong shape for us. And so for me, stepping forward and saying, okay, well, yes, I've been in those positions. I've been in those places where I've tried to twist myself into shape for other people, was really important too.
And I think that was my aha moment. Even though I felt quite vulnerable in that space, it made me recognize why I was so upset, because I felt like I had to change who I was with the values that me and my partner have, like the things we have to give up, like being creative, having that sense of freedom, having that sense of adventure, having, kind of sacrificed my career identity. But instead, I started to shift, instead of using that energy to focus on what it can't be and feeling stuck, kind of going, well, could we create that own space ourselves? Could we start designing that new model? Is that a new design challenge almost to how to, if we lead at home and find space and flexibility, could we try to then find that as our own thing? So it allowed myself to almost just loosen up.
And I think that's really important, giving yourself to find the solutions that are right for you rather than assuming other people's solutions, templates that other people have, templates that society has, expectations that you think other people have, and be able to say, well, this is who I am and this is how I need things to be, and start to be in a dialogue with your partner, with your workplace, with your family, with society at large, and say, okay, this is how I want to do this stuff.
So my valuable lesson was that becoming a leader isn't just about work. It's kind of trying to integrate both your professional and personal life, whether it's related to relationships and so forth. But this insight opened up some opportunities for me and possibilities. So I found two great role models in a very unexpected way. Both my grandma and my niece are. They were right in front of me. So say, for example, my grandma, she has had 2 strokes in the last 3 years. But every time I meet her, she is still super kind, warming, every time that we meet. She also raised a family of 3 in a really tiny small island near Hong Kong, whilst my granddad was living in UK, working for £3 a week to try and raise the family and send the money back. Now, fast forward to where she is now, she gets to meet my little niece. That's like the 4th generation. She's had a rich life living in the UK without speaking a word of English. And then my niece has the amazing gift of being the centre of attention, which means that everyone focuses on her, which means that we actually get to be really present. When do we ever do that? So sometimes, you can find role models when you stop looking or when it's in unexpected places.
And for me, part of what I realised I needed to share with Rachel was experience I didn't have. And so being able to say, okay, you know what, I don't know what it's like to be a woman approaching my 30s, wondering how I can move into a career, and being able to hand her off to people that I knew had had that experience and lived through that experience over the last 4 or 5 years, and say, well, you know what, go and talk to Amy. She's now got a couple of 4-year-olds, and she can tell you what that was like. That was really important. And recognising that what was being shared was very personal, and being comfortable equally sharing my personal experiences and places where in my relationships things hadn't worked out, and saying, gosh, if I could do that again, I would have involved my wife in this way at that moment. So again, matching that level of vulnerability, I think, was really important for us.
So we've got the sign, time is up. but we're trying to summarize quickly now. So my 5 key lessons that I learned from Giles over the last 3 years. Be accepting of who you are. Giles is brilliant at reminding me that you don't have to be someone else when you're leading, when you're speaking, when you're writing, whatever you're doing. Make the space for being present. That's when you find that inner voice to guide you. We don't give that space enough. Cultivate a growth mindset, because that always opens possibilities. And discomfort is an indicator of change. That's the one that I'm always very resistant to. I hate that feeling, but then Giles reminded me it's actually an indicator of growth. And the last point, I think it was about when you deal with a setback, you learn a lesson. So that's how you build your resilient muscle.
For me, as a mentor, sometimes what you're doing is sharing experience. Actually, that's the least interesting part of being a mentor. Helping people find their own answers, helping people do things that you'd never have thought of, helping people do things in their way, that's much more rewarding. And that's hard. It's hard to hold yourself back, hard to say, oh, I know what you should do here. Oh, here's an idea. Hard to give people the space to find their own answers. And that's a skill that's worth developing. It helps you to grow as a leader. Sometimes, of course, you need to hand over to somebody else. Sometimes your experience isn't relevant and it's useful to hear from somebody else, somebody different. I think one of the things that we heard as we were reflecting on our story was that it was always about trust. Any relationship is. But that trust grew as the relationship grew. And it needed to grow because the issues that we were discussing were more and more personal, more and more about who Rachel was, about what it means to be yourself. You can't do that all at once. It's a process, it's a journey, and you need to go through each stage. And finally, just to remind ourselves that this has worked out well for us. There may have been points, and there may be points if you're mentoring or being mentored, where things don't work out so well. It's really useful to have a good framework in case that happens. So that leaves us with an invitation to all of you to think about where you are in your personal leadership journey.
So are you ready to take courage to do something different? Are you ready to reflect and rethink the relationships who have power over you that you can navigate through? Or are you ready to start bringing more of your whole self to work?
Where are you today? What's most important to you right now? And where can that take you in your leadership journey? Thank you.
So I'm just conscious of needing to be out in a couple of minutes. So if we could have maybe one question. Sorry, put someone on the spot. Any questions? We can continue in the pub if people would prefer. Look at these photos.
Let's tell you something about the books. Brené Brown's Dare to Lead is very much about how do you have the courage to step out and be yourself at work. It's about bringing your whole self to work. The coaching habit is where that coaching framework comes from. It's a really great how-to of coaching. Radical candor is about being honest with yourself and others around you. We both read this as an audiobook, and we don't think you should, because Kim Scott has the most annoying voice ever. So for God's sake, read that and don't listen to her. And Turn the Ship Around is a book about leadership on freaking submarines. And it's a book about leading by not giving orders. It's a book about a submarine captain taking over a command, true story, and realizing that whenever he gave an order, things fucked up, and he should just let people lead themselves. So a great book about how to grow leaders in the team around you.
And finish up some more conversations there. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. That's good. Thank you.